Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to crack straight into it. Welcome to this afternoon's Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. Welcome to elected members and members of the committee, our independent members, staff, visitors, and all of the people tuning in on the live stream to watch the meeting. We are going to start off with karakia. So if we could all turn to page 5, which has the karakia there.
Whakataka te hoa ki te ura.
Whakata hou ki tonu.
Kia mā kene
Ki ta
tara ki tau. He hiaki ana te ata ki ura. He teo, he huka, he hauhu. Tige, mōrewa.
Thank you very much. All right. Received no apologies. However, I do notice that we've Councillor Proctor isn't with us, so I'll move an apology for Councillor Proctor, seconded by Mr. Mayor. All in favour? Thank you. With no public participation requested today, no late items, any declarations of interest from members? No, thank you. And if I could get somebody to move the meeting minutes for the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting of 7th of June 2023. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Grimstone, seconded by Councillor Olsen. All in favour? Thank you. And then secondly, the meeting minutes for the in-committee meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee on 7th of June. Again, moved by Councillor Grimstone, seconded by Councillor Olsen. All in favour? Thank you very much. So just to cover off a couple of quick things, we have a pretty full agenda. We have some time constraints today, and I think there are a couple of members that might have been given some incorrect information about the proposed finish time. But we do have a hard finish time of 4 o'clock. We've got another presenter coming in, but we're going to move at pace to try and get through this. Acknowledging Member Everton, you need to leave at 3 o'clock, which is the time that we advised you that the meeting was going to end, so apologies for that. But yeah, we're going to crack into it. There's also just been a bit of adjustment to the order of the agenda. I won't run through that there now to save time, but I'll introduce the items as they come up. But we are going to start with item 6.1, and so I'd like to welcome Michelle McDonald from PwC up to the table. So this is item 6.1, PwC tax governance presentation. If I could get somebody to move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter be recognised as not significant. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Tukapua, seconded by Member Everton. All in favour? Thank you. Welcome, Michelle. And Peishan, welcome to the table.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have Michelle McDonald, Director from PwC, here to present to us the annual tax update for the Council as part of the tax governance framework that we have. I'll pass you over to the experts now.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for having me here today. As Peishan said, I'm Michelle McDonald. I'm a director at PwC in the Wellington office. We've been working with the council for a number of years, and a couple of years ago we put in place what we call this tax governance framework, and that's designed to make sure that council is complying with its tax obligations and is keeping itself safe in that space. So since we put in place the tax governance framework, we've done a couple of tax evaluations, one of GST and one of payroll taxes. And whilst there were some elements of improvement required, that's not unusual. And the council is well on track in terms of the go forward in correcting or making the improvements that it needs to make sure that it is fully compliant. So that's really pleasing to see. I guess I just want to give you a bit of context around why why there is a tax governance framework for council. And that's because, council is a large taxpayer. Even though you're not subject to income tax as a council, you are like a custodian, I guess. You're the tax collector for the government in terms of GST and PAYE. And those are quite significant taxes that you pass through to the government. Also, there's FBT. It's a smaller amount. Typically, it's only 1% of the tax taken in the country. But that's still an area of compliance that is needed. And the plan is that we will be looking at FBT compliance for the council within this current financial year. More broadly on tax governance, so it is an area of focus for inland revenue, and over the past 2 years, inland revenue has written to a select number of large corporate entities in the country. I think there was like 150 in the first year and 300 in the second year that received letters from inland revenue where they were asking about the organisation's tax governance framework. Have they got their compliance under control? And inland revenue wanted that information reported back to them, and where the entities were remiss or had some shortcomings, inland revenue went to them with some kind of, you must improve kind of recommendations. This year we've just seen another bunch of taxpayers, once again corporates, and the number has increased to around 600. But this year the inland revenue doesn't want the taxpayers to report back. They're just saying to the taxpayers, you do your own self-assessment and we might come along and look at that at some point in the future. But that is kind of the way that inland revenue are going. And at the moment, no local authority has received any of these questionnaires from inland revenue, but that's not to say that they won't in the future. As I said, you are a large taxpayer given the number of staff and the amount of GST that you collect and pay.
Michelle, we're just going to move your microphone just a little bit closer to you, if that's all right. The volume's fine. Just to make sure it's picked up on the live stream.
Sorry. So yeah, that was kind of the scene setting. I think the council's in a good place in terms of its tax compliance, and it is coming to us when there are questions that are tricky. A lot of the tax compliance is dealt with in-house, as it should be, with the appropriate tools that council has in place. But sometimes there are tricky questions, and that's when council does come to us for some advice. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So, any questions from around the table? Stan.
Thank you for the update, Michelle. Just a quick question. It's good to hear that the council's in a good place. With the recent audits that were done with payroll and GST, we did see a number of items that needed to be fixed and corrected. And I see, for example, with payroll, there won't be another audit until 2025. And I just wanted to check, in terms of closing out all those items and issues that did pop up through the audits, is there a PwC review process or involvement in just making sure that those items do get closed out correctly and we won't see them popping up later in future audits?
The idea is that as council corrects those, makes those corrections, then they would get reported. I understand they get reported back to this committee in terms of progress. And if council wishes us to come along and check that those specific issues have been corrected, then we can. Otherwise, we would typically leave it until the next review is scheduled. But we can certainly tick things off sooner if required.
Is there any further questions? Member Sarah.
To that, thanks for that question, Jenny. I think I just wondered internally if there's any kind of ongoing review just to follow up what's been found either in the main audit or the reviews that have been undertaken by PwC. Sorry,
Hey, Sean.
direct it to Sean, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Throughout the day-to-day operation, we do have review process in place to make sure that things are not what they shouldn't be. So as part of the review process, anything that is found then is then flagged and addressed. So with the items that are on the monitoring report that we're going through, as they have been addressed and process put in place, then the updates will be provided at that point. And also is an ongoing operational side of things. As and when we find things, when we do the review, regular review, then it usually gets flagged straight away. So we do have proper review process in place for things like reviewing payroll file, reviewing master file for supplier changes and different things. Yes.
Councillor Grimson.
Yeah, so I just following on, and the question may be for Michelle, but looking at the 10 questions there that you put in the report that set out the tax governance and practice, are there any of those 10 questions where the councils currently need work in progress, or are we feeling quite comfortable we can tick the box, or we're in a good space across all 10 of those measures? And Peishan, you may want to comment if officers hold a different opinion.
Thank you for that question. So from our perspective, I think that council is in a good place. The one area, I guess, that we see across the board, and it's no matter what, in every council where the advisors, there can be a breakdown in communication between different parts of the organisation, and typically that is between finance and HR and property and finance. And so one of the work-ons for all of our clients, no matter what, is that we suggest that those lines of communication are kept really open, because that's where some of the bigger exposures can manifest themselves. And so it's that, I guess it's item 9, the significant transactions, and sometimes that can be in the property space. So it's just making sure that the property team are talking to finance about what their plans are in terms of either purchases or sales of properties, because that's where we do see issues happening in that space. Quite complex GST issues.
And Peishan, just reading through, and I'm pretty sure it's in some of the risk control metrics, the commentary around there are some actions and controls that have been put in place to ensure in-house that property HR are talking more clearly to finance as well, is there not?
Yes, so we put processes in place to make sure that, for example, whenever there's a sales and purchase of land and property, then finance is the first to know rather than the last to know. So that communications to the property team to make sure that finance is always the first point of contact rather than leaving us to the end when there's problem found. And again, we work quite well with HR, making sure that things we're trying to put in place, for example, take all the boxes in terms of tax compliance and all that. Yes, those steps are being done.
Michelle, just picking up on member Jenny's question. I guess so. There's two approaches to dealing with the closing off of advice and recommendations, which is sort of verify as you go, or wait until an audit cycle to close that off. Do you have any recommendations for us around, in terms of making that call, like what the right approach is? I mean, I thank member Jenny for that question, because it sort of prompted a line of thinking around how do we know when it's best to take which approach?
Yeah, really good question. So I think if there was a really significant issue, we would recommend that we come back to check that it's been corrected appropriately. If they're minor issues, and a lot of the issues that we have identified have been minor, then they're fine to leave until the next cycle, if you like. There was a voluntary disclosure that occurred as a result of the payroll review, and so that the process of going through that voluntary disclosure closed off that issue, and it has been the process has been corrected going forward. So that was probably the one significant issue.
I just note that if there is anything that, as we go through the audits, we just have the conversation about what needs to be improved, and if there was any uncertainty about what we'd done, whether it had fully resolved the issue to the point where we wouldn't expect anything to come up in the future, then we would just pick up the phone and ring or book in some time to check. So absolutely, if there was uncertainty about making sure that it was fully ticked off, we would check at the time rather than waiting for the future review.
If any other members go? Councillor Tukupa.
While you're on that, future reviews, that the FBT I think is for 2024, but you've signalled some recent developments around exemptions, public transport, and I think e-bikes, things like that. And then in the monitoring report, it's been picked up by audit, by purchasing goods on council's account. So there's an example there. But if I didn't see anywhere yet, I guess management with vehicles or council vehicles and that potential personal use in that space, and whether that will be covered, or you've already sort of had a bit of a look already. Is that something you'll be doing?
Yeah, so private use of motor vehicles, council motor vehicles, falls within the scope of an FBT evaluation. So that would be done at that point. We'd have a look at. Yeah.
This year, and also as part of the audit process, they also look at that as part of sensitive expenditure as well. So that's something that audit have looked at in terms of our calculations and things as part of their audit for this year as well. Some of the interim work that they do.
All right, just one final question on this, and I'll just invite other members just to further questions in a second. But in terms of beyond receiving this type of presentation and having tax areas on our monitoring report, do you have any advice or recommendations in terms of the role of the Risk and Assurance Committee and the types of things we should be, whether there's some additional reporting or anything further that you think that this committee should be reviewing or looking into? And I'll invite the independent members as well to express a view if they so wish.
Thanks. That's a really good question. For a local authority, reporting back in this kind of format once a year typically is enough, unless there is some really significant issue. And that's what our approach has been with other local authorities as well. So, if there was something that came up either through advice that we gave on a specific topic or through one of our evaluations, that meant that we needed to come and talk to you more often, then we would suggest that. And that's part of the elevation of the tax framework as well. It's designed to do that. But I think once a year is probably appropriate.
Did the independent members, did you have any thoughts, or it's okay if you don't? That's Member Jen?
I just say I endorse what Michelle has said. I think it's appropriate. I think on page 12 of the agenda we've got that plan, the long-term plan of the next few years around the specific audit items that are happening, and so we'll we've already seen those reports coming through to us at regular intervals as the work's completed. So yeah, I think for me it feels about right and consistent with practice that I've seen across the sector. If I can just add to that, I think that if there was anything major that came out, then obviously we would want something, perhaps have another quick look at it. But I think as it stands, that looks fine.
Fantastic. Thank you. Unless there's any burning final questions from any members, I'll thank you very much for the presentation, Michelle, and thank you, Peishan. We'll see you back later.
Thank you very much.
We are now going to move to item 6.4, which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report for August. I'd like to invite Tanya and Ashley, I think, coming to the table. If I could just move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Seconded by Mayor Burney. All in favour? Thank you. Welcome. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you once again for inviting me to report on health, safety and wellbeing at Council. The dashboard report for this meeting covers off the quarter across May, June and July, though the contractor numbers did not include July because of the timing of when the report was required. Everything else I got in there, just not quite that part. The leadership section is showing good numbers in engagement with the ELT, have been taking up opportunities around leadership walks, health and safety, wellbeing framework engagement, and some occupational opportunities were taken in the health area of influenza vaccinations, which we offer to all staff. So that has upped our numbers around leadership engagement, which has been great. The 2 incidents reviewed in that area that were not reviewed within the 2-week requirement time have been completed, and they were done within 3 weeks, but they still show as a negative across that time. So that's where they were sitting. Mentioned in the risk management page was a visit by WorkSafe. The inspectors came to the Levin wastewater treatment plant. This was a really positive visit with the inspectors, and they were interested in how the site was managed and the hazardous substances, how they are stored, and the training undertaken with that area of the wastewater treatment plant. We've had some changes in the health and safety representatives for our organisation, with the numbers currently reduced, but processes underway at the moment to elect new HSRs where we need them, so that has shown up in the reporting also. And at the last Risk and Assurance Committee meeting, we talked about fire warden reporting, and just to assure the committee that I do have the last bit of training with the fire wardens that haven't been collected up in the training booked for next week. So at the next report that will show at 100% also. So that's the dashboard report.
Yeah, I'll get you to pause there.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. If the members have any questions on the dashboard? None. I see none. So just to thank you again for the high quality of reporting. What we will do now is we'll move into the deep dive around the footpaths, and this was something that the committee requested at the last meeting, and so we'll probably just what I'd ask you to do is obviously there's quite a lot of operational focus around how we manage that risk, and so just to remind members, I guess our focus is on the processes and the systems and how we're managing risk. So we won't go into too much of the operational detail, but over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Chair. So the report really was a collaboration with the land transport team that gave us the format around footpaths. It's not an area I delve into regularly, so I had a bit of learning to do. how we manage from the space of CRMs coming in when we get informed of footpath issues to how that is managed and what we have around it in that process place to ensure health and safety not only of the contractors that are doing the work, that ensuring that their workers are safe, our staff that engage with them are safe when they are doing that, and then of course that other persons, which is our community members, whilst work has been done, has been safe. So I suppose the focus from me from a health and safety point of view was around that contractor management and ensuring the communication was clear and the work that's been done is appropriate and reactive a lot of the time, as the numbers were showing. So happy to take questions if you have.
Any questions from Mr. Mayor? This is one of your favourite topics, and one of the things that you get asked a lot about.
I just want to compliment the team for turning this around as quickly as they have done, because it was only the last meeting that we asked for this done, and it's really good. I suppose, and you've just alluded to the fact that the roading team have contributed quite a bit to the fact of this, because there's some questions I'll probably follow up with them rather than yourselves in terms of some of that data. But I was curious to know around the number of CRMs that we're getting. Is that increasing, decreasing? Is there a trend? Is it, is this about normal?
We will just pass this over to Dan, if you are able to answer that.
Yeah, Mayor Bernie, I'll endeavour to come back with the team with the true and accurate data. We'll follow that up after the meeting, rather than me quoting ad hoc figures. We'll just get that information to hand.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. I think the Chief Executive did remind me prior to the meeting that we do have some metrics as part of our voice of the customer work that provides sort of some insight around satisfaction score with footpaths, and it might be that we can use that as well to understand a little bit more around that satisfaction score and what's driving that. Yeah. James is late. I think what we'll do is
through you, Mr. Chair, I just wonder while our Land Transport Manager gets himself comfortable, so the data that I noted to you, Councillor Jennings, was that our footpath maintenance customer satisfaction score sat at 40.7% satisfaction last year, and that's decreased by 5.3% and is now sitting at 35.4% satisfaction. Noting, of course, that the deep dive you have asked for is one of risk and health and safety, and the insights that we've sought from our community is that of perception and experience. But Mr. Wallace might want to comment on those questions that Mayor Burney asked earlier.
Councillor Grimstone, I'll just get Mayor Burney just maybe perhaps repeat his question for James, and again if he wants to answer that now, or we can take that on notice and come back to you with some answers.
And I suspect Tanya's already alluded to the question that and I was just curious, James, as to the trend that we're seeing in CRMs. I mean, the figures that the Chief Executive's just given us now indicate that maybe they are increasing and that we're getting more reports. That could be the fact that more people are complaining about incidents that they've had rather than probably just putting up with them.
Yes, sorry, James, you didn't have your microphone on there, so I'll just for the listening public, basically you've said you'll go away and do some work and bring back some further information. Yes, thank you. All right, unless there's any further questions, what we're going to do... Oh, we've got one from Councillor Tukupa. Oh, no, Councillor Grimstone. My apologies.
I think I might have gone on first. I guess from a process perspective, we've had 83 CRMs or case managements that have been, raised from a service level agreement, because I think this links back to what Monique was talking about around community perception of quality. What would this? Are we quick enough to remedy a case to go out and assess it and then make a decision around how to mitigate it or fix it? Would be the question that I'd probably raise, and I'm also operate on an assumption, and you can just answer with a yes, that the 323 metres of very poor footpath we'd identified would have been addressed by now through a plan, and that the poor 9.6 would be on your work schedule to remedy or look at.
Yeah, so we to cover off the first question around basically response times when we have a CRM for a footpath complaint. If it depends on the nature of the complaint. If it's a immediate health and safety hazard, a trip hazard, it goes direct to a contractor, and the contract states that they need to have it made safe within 24 hours of the CRM arriving to them. And it's very rarely that they don't meet that specification. In terms of addressing the very poor conditioned footpaths, so yeah, we've got a lot of very poor footpath. We've got about 200 kilometres of footpath in the district, a little bit more off the top of my head. And we can, 229.92 kilometres of footpath. Our current footpath renewal budget is, and that's how we have to fix it. We have to renew we can't maintain footpath into a better condition. We need to renew it. With our current footpath renewal budget of $400,000 per annum, we do about 2 kilometres of footpath. So we aren't able to quickly get through the very poor condition footpath.
So outside of the 323 metres, it would take us 5 years to upgrade or renew the poor footpaths into excellent or average condition, correct? Understanding that answer?
Broadly, although we're not, we might have a 20 metre section of footpath which is very poor, and we might be renewing a, say, 500 metre section of which maybe 60% of it is very poor and the rest might be average, but we'd be wanting to do a whole lot for various reasons. We might need to do some renewal to do some improvements, for example. We might be renewing after there'd been a water main renewed under the footpath or something along those lines, and we've elected to renew the footpath to a good quality standard alongside that work. So it's where we try to target where it needs to be, but the realities of how the Ford Works program is developed, we have to sort of take into consider practical matters as well.
Councillor Tupu, I'm going to invite you to ask a question in a second, but James, can I just, so based on the responses to Councillor Grimstone, it's kind of left me with the impression that the available budget is misaligned to the level of, or the condition of the asset. And so you're operating in a very constrained environment in terms of actually proactively addressing. Is that a fair, it might be a bit of an unfair question, but
I think with that information you could draw that conclusion, and I would agree with it, but I would be hesitant to start presupposing a long-term plan process where you're looking at the full range of problems in the land transport activity and you're considering a fulsome investment program that's dealing with a great deal of issues.
Councillor Tukapua, did you have a question?
Yeah, and I'm happy for this the answer to come later, because taking note of Tanya's point about what angle essentially they covered in terms of safety for footpaths. I was interested in the design and safety of, I don't know what you call them, but in that photo, those yellow, they usually sit in the concrete on the corner before you cross paths. I just wanted to understand the testing and how that becomes a design feature and the best way of, I don't know what the word is, but because I've witnessed incidents along those rumble strips, I know that.
Yeah, so we call them tactile indicators. They're a treatment which is supposed to indicate for people who are visually impaired in some way that this is where you can cross the road. Contractors have, over the last few years, gotten significantly better at installing them. There's 10,000 ways you can get it wrong and one way you can get it right, pretty much. And it seems like it's a simple thing to do, but to get the levels right when they're placing the concrete and forming it all, it's quite actually a technical exercise to get the pavers right. And generally, the installations we've seen over the last 2 years have been they've been correct. They've been doing the job. They haven't been creating any unnecessary trip hazards, or they haven't been pointing in the wrong direction where someone visually impaired might be sent to the wrong part of the road. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Member Sarah, I'll let Councillor Tukupa follow up if that's all right, and then I'll come back to you.
I'm pleased to hear they're being installed better these days. But I guess, I probably witnessed the worst case scenario, like with my own eyes, a mother with a pram rolled over this thing and the pram flipped and the baby hit it onto the road, bleeding, and there were I pulled over, but there were some other ladies around who rushed to, and it was just awful. I nearly died just watching the whole thing, but I watch these and I just hope that we put in the best, so there's that safety concern I have.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'd be very interested to find out where that was potentially offline.
On the corner of the warehouse, Queen Street, and where the police station, that corner.
Perhaps we can link you to a post-meeting to get some further details. Member Sarah.
You've got these ranked excellent, average, good, poor, very poor. Is that about risk? If I said very poor, is that the most risky, that we've got 323 metres of risky footpaths? And is there any kind of remediation that could be done that could minimise the risk, even if we don't have sufficient budget to bring that very poor up to excellent or average or even good? Is there anything that we could do just to sort of try and mitigate that current risk, if that's how it's looked at?
Yeah, I think describing it in terms of risk is not perfect. It correlates to the risk, but we have a maintenance budget which is separate to the renewals budget, and the maintenance activity, it doesn't improve the condition of the asset, but it can reduce the risk. So a very poor condition footpath will have a lot of cracks. You can have a crack in a footpath that is a trip hazard and a crack that isn't a trip hazard, but they both result in a very poor quality. So our maintenance budget's used to go and turn all the cracks that are a trip hazard into not a trip hazard. It doesn't make the footpath any better, but it helps address the risk.
Thank you.
Councillor Grimstone.
Do we are we working on any forecasts or expect to see an increase in the number of reports given the fancy new tool the council's about to launch to make it easier to report this type of case?
Yes, I certainly hope so. Generally, the calls we get about footpaths, they're not often people seeing a crack and sending it to us because it's a lot more effort to do that. But if you've got an app on your phone, you can take a picture and that can be addressed. A lot of the CRMs we get are people have a reason to call, and it's usually because something's happened. So I'd much rather address these issues before someone falls over, for example.
Chief Executive, you look like you wanted to.
Just through the chair, of course, noting that today we launch Anteno, and so we're now providing our customer a tool where they will have an app on the phone where they can take the photo, GPS the location, and that be coming into the organisation as CRM. So what that might do is mean that we are seeing things highlighted before it becomes a risk, and before it becomes a risk where it triggers investment based on our current investment profile and an observation.
Can I just going down this line of inquiry? So the great news about the Anteno coming online. So to member Sarah's point, the descriptors here are about condition, and often we'll get a report about the condition of something through a CRM. But how are we applying that risk analysis piece so that we're not only just understanding condition, but then we're understanding what's the corresponding level of risk. It might be poor condition, but does it actually translate into an urgent need to address this? So, the 24-hour response time.
I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got more work to do to give you confidence that we're applying that level of assessment into those decisions.
I think that if members are happy to give me a nod, I think that this is something that would be, as a committee, I'd be quite keen to explore further down the track once we've given you that opportunity to do what you need to do in that space. But I think that this would be a useful area for us to revisit and understand what we're doing in that space. Did Councillor Tukupa?
Yeah, well, following up, and probably more to Clint's point, and I hear the rationale around, transport, look across the whole activity. But for me, waiting for 5 years to rectify a very poor is not good enough. So at a council level, we need to look at it.
Are members comfortable that I think the officers have listened to the conversation and we can take that away and work out what that looks like next? I don't think we need to make a recommendation or anything at this point. People comfortable with that? If there are any further questions for the team, otherwise we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, James. Appreciate your contributions. Ashley, if you can stay put. We'll now move to item 6.5, which is our legislative compliance program. I'll move 2.1 and 2.2, which is that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. If I can second it. Seconded by Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you very much. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. I will take the report as read. Pretty much an overview of this is we provided the first legislative compliance report last to do as part of this. So we put together a program which is identified here, where it really looks at all of the steps that we need to undertake to ensure that this is a really robust process, instead of saying this is what we think are the most important pieces of legislation and we'll report on those. We really need to take a step back, look at it across the board, and then come back to you with an improved, thought out process, which is what has been included in here. I might take note of the comment that member Jenny mentioned around comply with, and we will look into that to see what that tool enables and to see if that is useful. I've heard some great feedback already on it, and useful to look at as part of this. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take those.
I'm just going to start us off with a question, just in terms of 3.2, where we've sort of identified the pieces of legislation where there's some of that initial level of focus. And just to, if you don't mind, just giving us an update on the work that was underway in terms of the conflicts of interest in relation to, there was a piece of work that was underway around conflicts of interest, and obviously one of the pieces of legislation here is the Local Authorities Members' Interest Act, and just if you could just speak briefly to where we're at in terms of that work stream.
Yeah, so we are fully involved in that. We have updated all of our internal processes. We've had email out to staff, upskilling them around what needs to be declared, and staff, I think we've had a massive uptake, especially in the last week, of staff declaring their interest, and it's now in that collation period. So next RAC, we will bring back that information. Yeah, so well underway.
Did members have any other questions? Member Jenny.
Thank you for the report. You've got quite a long list of things to do there, and I'm just wondering the doability of it all. I'm not aware of the resourcing you've got in-house, so I'm just wondering, what does it look like in terms of time? I'm just at a very, very high level, and the reason I ask is I suppose I've seen processes where in-house you try and work this all out, and it's really, really complex, and then rolling out a program for staff is challenging, and there are tools like the one I'd mentioned that can actually make it a lot easier. So yeah, just interested in what the plan is at a high level to actually implement all of this.
And you may have noticed there wasn't a timeline included in this, and that is exactly why. So we are in the process of actually project planning this. As you said, there is a lot of work to be completed, especially if we do it fully in-house through spreadsheets and the like. So looking at that piece of software that will help us will definitely be a bonus. The ideal will be that we, in 6 months' time, that we have a really clear list and we're bringing a good report through, even as a starting base, and then continuing to make improvements on that. But I think those tools that can help us, because when we don't have a lot of resource to put onto this right this moment in time, so it is something that will be slowly being done at the same time as other pieces of work. So it's not a quick and easy or a fast, something that we're going to put all of our energy onto, but we definitely see the importance of it and to continue to keep it moving.
I think it's fair to say as well, actually, that through other work streams underway, that some of this is organically being done, and I've been a bit remiss in providing the independent members with the organisational performance report, which talks to things like some of our priorities around doing the stock take with bylaws and Section 17A reviews, those kind of things. So I think we'll start to see some of this coming through, but thank you for that question. Are there any further? Oh,
Just one, and it's probably more something to think about for the future when you've got your program in place. I know it's going to continue because there'll be more legislation you need to be compliant with, but something we did previously was actually introduce an annual attestation as to legislative compliance, which again gets people thinking about what it is that their area is responsible for. And you talk about training programs, which are great, but some areas are more specific to departments and not necessarily to others, so you're getting into quite niche areas, and I think that something like an attestation of compliance can be quite useful.
Yeah, thank you, Member Sarah. I think that having previously had experience with that, I think that that's actually a very good suggestion, and if there's support around the table for that, I think that that's something that we would be very keen to go in and have a look at that and report back to the committee around that. Any further views, comments, questions? Well, just thank you very much, Ashley, for your report and farewell. You've got other places to be. So we are now going to move to, Grayson's going to remind me, 6.2, which is the Risk Management Status Quarterly Report for August, and we'll invite Rob up to the table. So if I could move first 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Member Jenny. All in favour? Thank you very much. Rob, very comprehensive report and obviously a number of pieces to it. Invite you to take us through it and then we'll open the floor to some questions. It's actually, sorry, just also signal that we have brought forward item 6.8, which is the annual insurance renewal process update, and that's members will be aware that there's a memo from Rob in there that has a number of aspects around insurance. So we're going to follow this item with that item immediately, so that there's that continuity of discussion.
Thank you, Chair, elected members and independent members. I guess insurance is a big part of the theme of this month's, this RAC's report anyway, as it has been a key focus in recent, probably from February to March around the renewal process. But in light of the report around risk management per se, I guess the main thing that the report is signalling is that there has been a significant amount of progress in the risk management framework and risk management strategy space, and that's been highlighted in the assessment I did at the beginning of August, the maturity assessment in respect to that, as I've explained in the past, being a part of the OAG measurement tool. And we've raised 11 points from a maturity perspective, which even has surprised me around the quick uptake from a risk management perspective. Whilst some of that improvement has been around the architecture with the strategy and the work plan and the framework being signed off, there has been a significant amount of engagement with officers and, of course, with elected members, and improvement in the understanding of risk management within local government and within the organisation. To probably holistically, a lot of that focus from a cultural perspective has been at the higher level, so from an executive leadership team perspective and activity management perspective. Obviously, I'm still working on the risk appetite, which we're presenting in September, or concluding in September, which is a key piece of work from an elected member perspective. However, a significant part of our focus at our ELT meetings now are on risks at mind or top of mind, and that we call it keeping people awake at night or are worried about. So we're starting to see a more enhanced approach around the way we're reporting our risks as well. So as we've even at every council meeting, it's the same as ELT. It's very rare that a conversation is had without the word risk being in it, and we're starting to capture that now. I think you probably would have seen it in a couple of papers that have come to council now, one being the Midwest submission from a waste disposal perspective, where we had quite a significant risk assessment attached to that, and really that's just providing the right audience with a really high level of information and allowing better informed decisions. So we're starting to do that a lot more now in the workplace as well, with the risk assessment lens being applied to a lot of the projects we're working on. Although I probably, just sitting in the background there listening to the footpath conversation, we could apply something a little bit more in depth around that, given the questions that come from it. And because from a risk management perspective, you generally know when the assessment on something isn't great when there are more questions and answers when something is presented. So, yeah, really good. Really pleased about the progress that has been made from a risk management perspective. So specific to that, the report also talks about the HDC insurance strategy and work plans and the asset selection policy and methodology document, which have come out of the process work and is essential for us to move forward and understand that our risk renewal process, our insurance renewal process will have quite a significant lens on it on an annual basis, because it is a moving feast from an insurance renewal perspective, and that we need to have a strategy and work plan that informs that work on an annual basis. Other than that, from an overall report perspective, your chair, did you want to talk more to that report, or do you want to get into some of this insurance work? Or?
I think what we'll do, thanks Rob, is I'll just pause there and we'll see if members have any questions or input or comments on what you've just taken us through. Members, any comments, questions? Or are you keen to jump straight into the insurance, more of the insurance? Yeah, look, Rob, if you're happy to lead into that.
Cool, and I guess from a risk strategy work plan perspective, it is very, it is specific to where we're on track with different things and what's actually happening from an organisational perspective. So going into the insurance side of work, I'll just go through the strategy in the first instance, and that the strategy really defines our approach, what we're doing every year, and it does need to start. We've got a significant amount of work to do before February, March next year, but each renewal process does need to start early on in the piece. Our insurance policies run from the 1st of November till the end of October, and so there's a lot of work that needs to be done around loss mapping and how we present the renewal process from a risk versus cost perspective, which has been a significant focus this year, hence leading on to item 8 around the memo to the executive team. That really does outline, I guess, the crux of the outcomes of a lot of that work, where we're looking at deductibles. It's a high profile point at the moment with the article that was in the paper, in the news, I think it was the business news a few weeks ago in relation to councils and insurance coverage. And we're looking at everything in the way so we can, from a renewal process perspective, to get accuracy. And so the key areas from a strategy perspective is looking at our deductibles, our excess, and making sure that the risk that we're transferring to the insurance companies is appropriate to what we can afford and to the coverage we've got. So this year we have asked Aon to come back to us with 3 levels of deductible: 100,000, 200,000 and 300,000. Currently we're 10,000. We're one of the last councils in our LAS, and from what I understand, in the country. And so from a deductible perspective, we will ascertain to see what that impact has on our premiums before we present any decision based on which way we go with that. It is, whilst they say the reductions aren't significant, obviously the more risk that we take from an insurance coverage perspective, the less our premiums are going to be. Other areas from an insurance perspective is understanding the risks that are associated with our region, with our area. Important to understand that we're part of the Manawatu Wanganui LAS in our insurance coverage. We have collectively $2.5 billion worth of assets, and we have which are covered through the LAP, which is a government partnership for our underground assets, and through the MWLAS for our material damage and business interruption insurance for above ground assets. So we currently have 2 layers of MDBI, which is material damage above ground, and the first layer is for 150 million. For the members of the LAS, the council members, that gives us $150 million worth of coverage for council assets within our region, and that really only applies very much, as I've mentioned before, from a Cyclone Gabriel perspective, is a very good example where from their material damage perspective, they were the impacted councils. So you had Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Napier Council, Hastings, and Central Hawke's Bay, and collectively the estimates of the damage that they claimed from that was around 109 million for material damage. And so that's a good example. Wairau is not included in that because they sit within another LAS with Gisborne. So we have to assess that not only from a regional perspective, because we do our insurance through the LAS, we actually take on some of the risk that is opposed to other councils. So Manawatu, Palmerston North, and Wanganui are more susceptible to floods than we are, especially with the major rivers running through them. We do have some asset exposure to floods, which is mainly around Foxton wastewater treatment. But other than that, our risk associated with hazards in this region is relatively low compared to the others, and that's where the risk assessment comes about. Horowhenua, a good example that I've used with the ELT is the fact that over the last 100 years there's been 2 million earthquakes in New Zealand. Only 17,000 of them have been felt, and only 3 of them have been severely destructive towards the community and assets, and all 3 of those have been on the east coast. So, and then generally the destruction that is associated with them sits around the epicentre. So, yes, there's been other damaging earthquakes, but the damage hasn't been catastrophic or significant to council assets. So it's important to understand those sorts of things. Another key figure from a Horowhenua perspective is that our coastline is protected very much by Farewell Spit and the Taranaki Bight when it comes to tsunamis. So any predictions around tsunamis is 2 to 4 metres, where all of the east coast and the top of the North Island is exposed to 9 metres plus from a tsunami perspective. So from a coastline perspective, we've got one of the only accreting coastlines in New Zealand. Most coastlines are eroding. Again, we do have erosion, but they are very much based around where our rivers are, or water entries into our coastline. So our biggest risk is more from an accretion perspective and sand build-up, as per having to rebuild a surf club much closer to the ocean. So yeah, it's understanding all those things from a risk perspective before we just engage in additional layers or extending layers from an insurance perspective. We have to know those now before we take on extra premiums. This year we're expecting 10 to 15% increase in insurance, as indicated from an early perspective, and to offset that we need to make some decisions around what risk we're prepared to take. Now, I'd be foolish to sit here with all these people and say that we're not going to have an epicenter earthquake in the Horowhenua, and that the damage is not going to happen from a significant perspective. I'd never do that, but the risk of that happening is relatively low based on historical data and where we sit within the subduction zone. So if we the biggest worry for all of the councils is the mega subduction zone earthquakes that generally come from the Hikurangi Trench. So we've got fault lines that run through Horowhenua, but they're not aligned to the trench. It's the trench and the Tasman and the Australian plates, the Hikurangi Trench, that see those two plates meet that are our biggest threat. Now the biggest earthquake that has been felt in New Zealand is in 1855, and not far from here, just over the hill, in the Wairarapa, and that was an 8.2. And the damage to Horowhenua, although we didn't have these lovely buildings then, and that was more from a Shannon perspective, and it was more rolling damage than epicentre damage. So that generally is an important factor, because a lot of these buildings, contrary to popular belief with the Civic building, are built to withstand the rolling damage, whereas epicentre damage can be quite ruthless.
Thank you, Rob. It's fascinating, and I feel very assured that we've got someone with your professional background, expertise in risk, and we've obviously got one of our members is also an expert in natural hazards, and so we're feeling very, very assured. But I just wanted to open up for members to ask any questions on the draft strategy and the work plan first, and then we'll move into the valuation methodology and asset selection policy. Has anyone got any comments or questions on the insurance strategy and work plan? And then we'll get specifically into the memo in a moment. Member Jenny.
Not a question, but just a comment. I think there's been a lot of really detailed thinking, and it looks good. And I don't have any questions. It's been really comprehensive and thoughtful for the long term. So overall, I think it looks really good.
Bernie.
Thanks, Chair. Rob, on page 22 of the Risk Management Status Quarterly Report, you talk about insurers look favourably on organisations when evaluating a submission about they haven't undertaken a comprehensive loss modelling program. I mean, they don't reduce our premiums, though, do they? They just say, "Oh, you're doing a good job," and I wonder, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it does have a direct impact on your premiums. So if you can, and because the loss modelling I've done to date in that document from a hazard assessment perspective is high level, we do need to do a lot more, and so does the MWLAS in that area. But really it's more specific to where our assets sit against the risk. So if we can demonstrate to them that this building has very little risk of flood, because that is one of our bigger risks at the moment, then they're more likely to favour us towards a lower premium. But if we're high risk, like we're in zone 7 when it comes to risk against earthquakes, whereas in the Wellington region they're zone 9, which is the highest level, then that impacts on their premiums.
Just following up from that, because part of the earthquake-prone building legislation, we have been included in that Wellington region, because our timeline for fixing up our earthquake-prone buildings is half of what it is for those districts that aren't included in there. But from what you're saying, we almost shouldn't be in that part of that region.
Yeah, and I guess I've read quite a few documents on GNS and with the Earthquake Commission and things like that, and it does include our area from a rolling perspective, especially on the trench where it goes through the Cook Strait. And so, but when you're looking at the mapping, we're on the very edge of that. But from a zoning perspective, we're zone 7, but I guess from a prone perspective, then we've been zoned differently. But it's, I guess who you talk to would be how they would present. Like, without going too much off track, if I was to let Aon come in here to talk to you about our risk, that definition and that picture would be very different to the risk picture that I painted for you guys. And more recently, the MW Lash have commissioned a high level, not a low, not a intensive level earthquake framework, and they've commissioned it through Aon, and I really do question why they would do that when they're the ones that broker our insurance.
Thanks, Rob. Any further questions? Councillor Grimstone.
You've referenced the fact that we can have no insurance. We can explore self-insurance as an option before looking at the deductibility and excess levels, etc. for insurances. I'm keen to understand, have you got a preliminary view around what a desired level of self-funding would look like, the time frame and investment required to get us to a level that would give you comfort around that self-insurance option?
Personal perspective, I'd rather we were paying down debt than paying extraordinary insurance premiums. However, Russell Investments are doing some work at the moment around self-insurance and actually trying to get collective councils together to go through that. They're saying that it potentially could reduce premiums by 45% from a partial self-insurance perspective. Again, there's a lot of naysayers around that as well. However, it's a feasible area that I think we need to investigate moving forward from a self-insurance perspective, but from a council collective perspective. But from a self-insurance perspective, I think more from it's really, and I guess I wish we'd done our appetite first before we discuss this, but it's really about understanding from an elected member's perspective and from a ELT perspective, what level of risk they are prepared to take against the level of risk of likelihood of something happening for the Horowhenua district, and how much we're prepared to put aside from a self-funding perspective in case something did happen. Because if we had $150 million damaging earthquake in this region per se, and there was $30 million damage to that of ours, to our area, then even if we partially self-insured that to $10 to $15 million, from a risk perspective, would significantly drop the insurance, because the premium side of it, we have to look at the self-insurance side of it more, because the premium side moving forward, if we look without an inflation-adjusted insurance premium model for the next 100 years, you're talking close to $200 million for this council alone, just in premiums. So it's something that we do need to consider.
Mayor Bernie, I'm going to invite Councillor Proctor. He was patiently waiting, so come back to you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it was very important. Thanks. It's good work. I suppose we can move on. I've got some questions, but we can save them for another day. Thanks.
Mayor Bernie.
And look, my question probably it's more about asset management and plans and valuations and things like that, which can probably wait as well. But I just reflecting on what our auditor said around how maybe our asset management plans weren't as comprehensive as they needed to be, and also how a bigger role they play in the valuation that must have quite an impact on in terms of our insurance, as well as understanding what sort of renewals and maintenance we need to do as well. And I just wondered, are we relating all that in terms of, because I'm always but I suppose a little cynical about the role that audit play in ensuring that our valuation is higher than they want it to be, or we want it to be, because that has a direct impact on, rates and everything else that we're doing as well.
I'm not sure if you wanted to answer that.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to.
I guess in terms of from an overall asset value perspective for asset management, that's where we are focusing a lot of work at the moment in terms of making sure, for example, that the Three Waters assets are all appropriately recorded in Hanson in the core asset management system, RAM for roading, and the core systems that we should be using. And then I guess from a valuation perspective, yes, we are required to, for audit every 2 years at least, is review the value of those and make sure we've got them recorded appropriately. That helps us. Yes, that does mean our asset values increase, but it does also make sure that we're reflecting the cost of replacement of them in the future and making sure that we've got enough money from depreciation to repay the debt so there's room in the debt in the future when we need to replace those assets. So from an insurance perspective, we are linking those things up in terms of making sure that our asset management information is comprehensive in the systems, and ideally then we have all the appropriate natural hazard layers that we can to when we send to our, for example, Queenstown, I know I've done an excellent amount of work in the past of making sure that they've got all of the key information of hazards and potential impacts for loss modelling for their area, complete with really robust asset management information that they can deliver to their insurer and allow them to load the appropriate information into their model, so that when the insurers are estimating what the premiums are, the level of risk for information that they might not know about is limited so that the premiums can reduce. So if there's everything, ultimately, if they know everything they can about our district and our assets, then the premium will reduce because that we don't know factor is not in the information. I hope that helps with what your question was.
Brooke, did you have a comment in response? Yep.
Ultimately important to your question as well, around the accuracy of the assets that we're actually insuring rather than just insuring everything. So that comes up in a minute anyway.
Councillor Proctor, my apologies.
I was going to ask a similar question to Mayor Burney, but since he started, I might as well ask my question. I mean, I get that, and thank you, Jacinta, for your answer. It was really good to see the alignment between our planning in the future around our assets and asset management, but a big important factor of that is whether they're exposed to hazards or not. But it could also, another factor we can look into account is the exposure and vulnerability within those buildings based on the use and occupancy, and whether it can actually drive more efficiencies around removing assets and those aspects of our business as well, which would lower rates in the long term.
And I think that's what you'll see out of that asset. Apologies, I jumped in there. In the asset selection policy that we've got there is looking at, for example, our parks assets and saying, do we need to have, and I'm making a number up here, but do we need to have 30 toilets insured, or do we just need to have the key ones that if the big event was to occur, that maybe we would only rebuild 5 of those. So therefore, we don't need to go and insure everything as we typically have. So that's part of this piece of work, is to have that conversation about the risk that we're happy to take on in that case.
So just following off, I suppose the risk for me is the amount of depreciation that we have to then fund out of rates. If our valuations increase significantly, as they have done over the last few years, and we're not funding depreciation properly, then it sort of, it doesn't align properly. And I just think I wish we could push back a little bit on some of those valuations from time to time, because I don't believe, in fact, that is a true reflection of the cost that it would actually cost to replace them if we did have some issues.
Yes, we can definitely, through the valuation processes, continue to make sure there's good due diligence, and in that once we get a valuation back, test that through the asset managers and through the GMs that are responsible for those asset areas, and make sure that they're legitimate. In those spaces, they do typically, though, WSP, for example, in the infrastructure space, they are using true unit rates based on construction work that's happening in our area. So they typically do use robust indices that are related to the area. They test them against the north, they test them against the south, But absolutely that we will continue to challenge them because they do have a massive impact in terms of the rates we need to charge, for sure. Yeah.
What I'm going to do now then, I think, unless there's any further questions and commentary on the draft strategy and work plan or the policy, what I'll do is I'll move those in block, and then I think we might move to 6.8 and have a further conversation just around some of the recommendations you've put in your memo.
Did you want to talk to the asset selection first, or?
Yeah, well, I think
because it's in.
If you're happy to speak to that, and then if there's any further questions about that, I'm sensing a level of comfort and support for the draft documents that have been presented. But if you can briefly speak to that, and then if there's any sort of follow-up questions, we'll take those.
Just quickly, and again referencing the article from a media perspective, more recently a lot of councils are starting to remove assets from being covered in insurance, and so it's important we do have a asset selection policy that does that. This year we're looking to move around 4.7% of our assets, which are made up mainly of playgrounds and public toilets, a few number of buildings that we're no longer using or empty, standing empty, and things like that. And so that equates to around $14.7 million, but removing that number of assets saves us around $50,000 a year in premiums. And compared to other councils, that's a relatively low level of reduction. And as we get more loss mapping and better information, we might be more selective of other assets, but we need to have protocol and principles based around that. A good example is Auckland City Council have removed 26% of their above ground assets, which is significant. I know they're being really aggressive at the moment from a rates reduction perspective, but if you go onto the OAG website, they do list there a number of organisations and central and local government organisations that are removing assets now from a selection perspective. And the other thing to consider too is, I guess, when it comes to insurance, I don't think any amount of insurance is ever going to be enough. And why I say that is, with the Christchurch earthquake and then the Cyclone Gabriel, the central government have had to put together packages outside of any insurance framework to rescue those areas. And I would say that they have set a precedence now for all local governments that they'll probably do the same. So I guess the main thing that we need to think about is our critical assets, and that's really important to us to replace quickly and should we have a disaster.
Looks like Councillor Tukapua has a question.
Well, it was the precedents that I was thinking of, and I guess the learnings from those events. And if something significant, though the likelihood that at least the assessment under the natural disaster for us seems low level in comparison to other places, I think we could, and I'm not saying we rely on the central government help in the future, but I don't think they would leave us in stranded. At the same time, under our debt profile, we always leave that headroom. There's now this work you're doing around self-insurance, and then still having insurance, and then these other groups that we're part of. A combination of all those things, those variety of approaches, gives me assurance that, if something bad were to happen, we're going to be okay. At the end of the day, I want, people will, if the people are resilient and we can tackle some of those immediate hard things, like fixing water if that was broken. Anything that was like massive in terms of roading, in the reports, Waka Kotahi will take care of emergency 60%. So we're left with the 40 of that. And if it was a major event, that would be work across a number of years, and you wouldn't do it all at once. So I think we would manage. I'm not fearful of a medium or a significant event, understanding the different ways where we can, gather the financial support to get the job done. Yeah, it's the loss of lives, but you can't predict or, because really that is the tragedy of an event, is any loss of lives. But earthquake or whatever, you can't control that. That's out of our control. But fixing up stuff afterwards and just finding money for that, will be okay.
And from a loss of life perspective, our mitigation there has to be building our resilience. And so whether we need bigger flood barriers and things like that, from an insurance perspective, you can't insure against loss of life. So it's unfortunate, but that's something we can't transfer.
Councillor Proctor.
I would just be very worried saying that the government's going to come to the party in a disaster in this area. I mean, I think we look at the Hawke's Bay area, and there's still a lot of small rural towns in that region which have received no support and no help. And even though the government or central government may come to the party, it'll be on their terms and their timeframes rather than ours. And I think we need to control the situation better.
As with roading, though, it's worth noting that our underground infrastructure is in partnership through the LAP with government, so they cover 60% and we cover 40%. Again, referring to the Auckland Council with their Auckland Water Care, which looks after the infrastructure, they've withdrawn 40% of their coverage of their assets. So some of these guys are just saying we can no longer afford it. We just have to rely on what's in front of us.
I guess, Rob, we can also take comfort that the primary tool that we have available to us is our debt headroom as a council, and that as things stand with Three Waters and the transfer of Three Waters assets, that our debt headroom or debt capacity picture looks better, I guess, and so yeah, I mean there's a range of tools and I guess things in place that mean that we can manage that single big event.
And that's right, a lot more work needs to be done, and we will get a lot better at this year after year, especially when we're considering things like the debt level and how that part plays in our preference of transferring risk and not transferring risk.
All right, well, unless there's any further comments or questions, I'd like to move 2.3 to 2.5 up on the screen. I guess I should read them out. 2.3, that the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the draft Insurance Strategy and Work Plan. 2.4, that the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the draft Council Insurance Renewal, Valuation, Methodology and Asset Selection Policy 2023 version 3. And 2.5, that D23103663 Council Natural Disaster Risk Assessment 2023 be received. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Any discussion, further discussion? All in favour? Thank you. What I'm going to do now is move us through to 2.8. And if I could just move 2.1, 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. I have a seconder for that. Councillor Olsen, all in favour? 6.8, yep, page 149. Thank you. So this is the annual insurance renewal process update, and so members will be aware that there's a memorandum that Rob has authored to the Chief Executive and Jacinta as GM Organisation Performance, and essentially the memo covers a number of, I guess, operational decisions, but the purpose of including this in the agenda and opening this item up for discussion is to, I guess, do a a sense check around the proposals and the recommendations that have been included in that memo align with where this committee's thinking may be. So I guess it's inviting that feedback and input in terms of what is included in the memo and some of those key recommendations on page 155. Rob, did you want to speak briefly to it? And then I think I'm hoping that there's some questions and comments that will help give you that picture.
Yeah, Chair. Yeah, I guess it's really just surmising the work we've done this year in relation to the points we've just talked about. We're still waiting on the deductible, and we won't get them probably more closer to the end of September, October, to what they will impact on our quotes. From a premium perspective, that we have put through a list of assets worth $14.86 million that we're looking to remove from the insurance schedule. And again, as mentioned, playgrounds, public toilets. And one of the reasons that they're an easy target, one is because they're low value, but two, because they're spread all over the district. And if we do have a disaster, it's very unlikely that they'll all get wasted at the same time. And then from the other point is the extension layers that we've entered into. So the extension layer that we entered into last year, increasing the insurance coverage from 150 million to 300 million. It's a time and place type of thing, and against a risk assessment perspective for Horowhenua and MWLAS, bigger picture perspective, that costs us $200,000 for that extra layer into that insurance coverage. And it is based around primarily on the increase of asset value, but however more around the fact as well that what's happening within from a climate change perspective with more flooding. And for us, our biggest risk in this district isn't from flooding. Our biggest risk is from a major earthquake. And even then, for us to have significant damage to go into that extra layer would require the earthquake to be relatively close to us. So my suggestion is for the next year only, for the next 12 months, that we remove that extension layer and then we reassess it for the next renewal to whether we re-engage it or not. 2 councils withdrew from it last year, subsequently saved themselves a couple of $100,000, took a risk, but it paid off.
Did members have any views, thoughts, questions in relation to the recommendations and decisions that are listed there on page 155? And is there anything further that you wanted to understand in terms of consequence, impact?
Just comment, really. And that's like, I actually read this item before I read the full-on work plan and strategy. And it's obvious to me the work, that level of work in detail that you're undertaking, and I really appreciate it. It's the best I've seen in my 10 years here. And so I would support those 5 recommendations you've put forward. And your honesty through the memo, I guess it's because it's written to Monique, so not really wanting to. But I like that you admit that there's a lot of work still to be done, and it's a good read, and I did have like I acknowledge some of those actions around the brokerage of LAPP, the LAP, and bits and pieces, but overall, I just want to thank you, and it's good work.
Yeah, look, I endorse the direction of travel, particularly around your recommendations. I would like to understand what the trade-offs are when the premiums are settled and come back, so that we can really assess the exposure to the community with the cost savings. But I'm not adverse to adopting any of the suggestions you've got there.
Point two, thank you, Councillor, in respect to the fact that whilst we're going through the renewal process, we don't have to settle or sit on anything until closer to October. So as we get that information and pass that type of information on, we can make a better judgment around, well, actually it is worth not taking that extension level, or it is worth going to $200,000 from a deductible perspective. This is just indicating that the direction we're heading.
Councillor Proctor.
Thanks. No, I understand the memo is very sensible and pragmatic. Just some simple questions. So the change that you're wanting to make will only be for 12 months, and you'll reassess the level of insurance again in 12 months. Is there any benefit in getting some more detail around the probability of those hazards occurring within the next 12 months and reporting on those? I mean, I'm sure that the probability of one of these large earthquakes occurring is not going to change from year to year, but some of the other hazards may change, which may then inform what assets we may want to insure more or not.
Jenny.
Is probably the hardest one to assess, because generally we have a relatively large earthquake in New Zealand every 300 years, and so it's hard to define in 12 months from a risk perspective. Sorry, but just that they know that there is a higher possibility that we're going to have a higher one every 300 years, and things like that. But the document from a hazard selection perspective does talk about our risk from a Richter scale perspective for 5,000, 2,000 and 10,000 years. And I have drawn down on a significant amount of information, but it's really hard to define in 12 months. But I guess where we're based at the moment from an assets selection perspective, the risk that we've historically been exposed to from major earthquakes and the valuation of our assets, that's where I'm more comfortable in saying that our existing layer is more than adequate, especially around our highest risk at the moment being around a cyclone ripping straight through us, like it did with the Hawke's Bay, yet their council assets above ground only suffered damage of 109 million, and that was one of the biggest we've ever felt.
Member Jenny.
Thank you. Like others, I'm reasonably comfortable with direction proposed. I couldn't see anywhere what the overall budget is, so that big picture budget implications. So maybe I've missed it. So that's one question. And I'm also wondering about the next steps and who's actually got delegation to approve this. Does this go to council for decision, or is this operational? It's within the chief executive's delegation. It's unclear because I couldn't see the dollar in this paper.
Thank you very much for that question. So I was going to go down a similar line of inquiry. So do you want to take that, Rob, or does that... Yep.
From a delegation perspective, because we're not spending money, I'm not sure where that sits in respect to the fact of coverage. So
Only spending money, not paying that insurance bill.
I might just frame the question. Oh, well, sorry, if you...
Off the top of your head, Rob, I can look it up, the total cost of the insurance premium.
the top of my head, it's currently with LAP sitting around 1.7 million, and then we generally have an inflation adjustment for that from a budgeting perspective, but we have indicated we're hoping to see some savings this year.
So from that perspective, it would absolutely be a council decision.
So that speaking to that, so that if the view, and it sounds like there's general support for the direction of travel, there's some further information to come, there's some further work to do, and I don't think at this stage this committee is recommending or endorsing. We're just providing that alignment of view and comment. But what happens next in terms of a decision point? Because obviously we can be sitting around this table as a risk and assurance committee and have a level of appetite and support the direction of travel. But how do we ensure that other councillors that aren't elected members that aren't part of this committee are across the fact that in 12 months' time, if we have that tornado that takes out a playground and a toilet block and it costs $100,000, and then they're asking, well, why are we not making an insurance claim for that? Like, how are we making sure that we're taking the governance body along for the journey?
Sorry. Yeah. I was, probably, correct me if I'm wrong, Monique, but I would say that once we have all the information in front of us from a premium perspective and the trade-offs from a deductible perspective, then that would be presented to council.
Through the chair, I think where we're at is this is a really good example of where in the past this has all been dealt with at an operational level and there's not necessarily been that exposure to the governance table. The value of our insurance payments are that in which they are above the financial delegations of the Chief Executive. I think what I would probably recommend is that we're seeking some endorsement that we're on the right track. We're going to continue down the path until we've got a little bit more information back from our brokers and our insurers around what does it mean for us, at which point we would bring it back to the council table for approval. Probably what we would do in between then is just clarify kind of the ongoing Chief Executive delegations, because I think that once we're comfortable that we've got the risk appetite sitting in a way where there's kind of those regular informed conversations about what does it mean for our insurance schedule, I don't think there'd be many councils around the country that would be signing off the annual insurance review. It's probably something I would recommend to council they have a big think about. Is that something that we could delegate to the Chief Executive off the back of there being a clear insurance strategy? And that's what we're building here, is an insurance strategy.
All right, well then, thank you very much for clarifying that. It's very, very useful. So I guess invite, probably just to keep moving the agenda along, I guess I'll invite any members who have an allergic reaction or are uncomfortable with anything, any of these recommendations or sort of the proposed direction of travel. Is there any objection, any concern? On that basis, I think we might leave it there. Robin, thank you for all of your hard work across all of those items. Really, really awesome to see the progress, and obviously acknowledging there's still a whole lot of work, but really, really thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to item 6.3, which is the Treasury report for the June 2023 quarter. We're going to race through, hopefully, the last few items, but 6.3, so that is on page, Grayson's going to help me out here. 89. Oops. All right, we've got Peishan back. Welcome back. Thank you. I'll move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Can I have a second of that? Councillor Olsen, all in favour? Thank you. Peishan, welcome.
Yes, this is the report to show the Treasury results for the June quarter. I will take the report as read, and thank you, Mary Jenny, for all the questions and the chance for us to pull the information together and the answers together. Of the 165 million borrowings, just wanted to flag that 50 million of that was for pre-funding, and so we put it on term deposits for maturities that are due for April, May 2024 debt. So that's why you have the huge number there. Also to bring to your attention is the additional borrowings compared to what we were budgeted to borrow for the year. that was a result of, so answers was provided, but which is a summary, a result of difference in what we were planning. So proceeds from sale of assets not eventuated for the year. Lower than expected capital grants due to some delays in some of the capital program, Tarika, for example. We do also have additional net interest of 1.7, additional operational deficit of the 2 million that the council was made aware of, and also a lower ending cash balance that was at play. So that resulted in a slightly higher net debt to operating revenue ratio compared to what was budgeted. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much for that overview, and again, just to thank Member Jenny for those brainy questions that were circulated before the meeting, and staff for responding to those. Did members have any further questions or areas of focus? Jacinta, yeah.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate in terms of the movement in borrowings. That's something that we're going to make be certain that at any meeting of council, whether it be at the Capital Project Steering Committee, you would have noticed when we had a briefing around the capital program, any council meeting, and at this table, there's always a really clear understanding of not only the operational side of the business, but from a debt perspective, every movement or category of movement in debt, what it was in the budget and what it's expected to be, so that everybody really understands all of the things that can impact that net debt position at any point in time. Because we do have some sizable assumptions in there, particularly around, as we mentioned in the email, around proceeds from sale of assets, that the whole table and the full council table needs to be and members of the public really aware of how we're tracking against those assumptions.
And so can I just follow up to that? I guess that there's probably two key parts that some of those assumptions around asset sales will be tested and re-examined as part of the upcoming long-term plan process, and also presumably there'll be a considerable focus on some of our significant forecasting assumptions around interest rate assumptions as well, in terms of our debt profile.
Yes, absolutely, and that as well as growth and making sure, for example, in the development contribution space, our budget for last year was around 1.4 million. We got pretty close at about 1.3, but ongoing as we look at the trends of what's coming in with resource consents and building consents, we need to pay careful attention to what those volumes are looking like and the impact that they have on our debt picture.
Mayor Bernie, looked like you had a question.
No, it's all right. I'll save it for later. Thanks. I'll talk to Jacinta offline.
Did members have any further questions on the member? Sarah?
Just the one. I noticed in response to the questions from Jenny with regards to the budget to 2022, you talk about increased borrowings, and some of it is for operational deficit. Any plans afoot to reverse that? Obviously, for short-term deficits, using a longer-term debt just seems a bit strange, and I just want to know if there are plans in place to improve that.
Absolutely, plans in place to improve that. That is from a financial competency of staff in terms of ongoing, regular, clear management in terms of forecast positions, making sure that we're actively managing that really well across the business. We were in a good position, but we did take some steps backward in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, which was unfortunate. But there's absolutely plans in place to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Any further comments, views, questions? Member Jenny.
I suppose just to follow on from the responses and just the conversation. So I suppose just at a high level, that graph that we've got on page 89, the trend we're seeing is basically a big step up in that net debt to revenue percentage. And and it's landing at 193% at June 23. And I saw one of the responses to what it's going to be in a year's time is 195%. So I don't know if that's quite right. Maybe that's based on the annual plan. So I suppose at a high level, it looks like there's quite a strong risk position here in terms of that debt trajectory, and Jacinta's mentioned some of that analysis and making really clear about decisions council's making around the impact on debt going forward. So I suppose it's going to be a tough long-term plan process, I expect, going forward, trying to land that financial strategy and the risks around debt projections, the flow-on consequences for Standard & Poor's credit rating. So, and you won't be alone. Many other councils across the country are struggling with that as well. So, I think we're getting good quality reporting here, so we can see what's happening. But I think that's a really important risk, financial risk, that really needs to be carefully managed through the long-term plan process. So it won't specifically be through this committee, I don't believe, but it'll be through council decisions in the long-term plan process. But it looks like the right conversations are happening and the right plans in place. Just another question I've got is just around the interest costs and managing that within budget. It's unclear from the report, whilst you've said what the cost of funds is for these new debt issuances and so on. Just overall, with the current debt portfolio and issuances and so on that you've got in place now, how are you managing the risks around staying within the budget for interest costs for this next financial year? And I remember you're projecting to overspend for June 23, so I'm just wondering how are you going in terms of treasury management this year?
Jacinta, yeah. Come.
Sure. I think it's going to be a real challenge. We are, if we want to meet strictly the budget across the whole of the council for all costs, we're going to have to find some savings because we set our interest at a certain level. We made it clear to the council as part of finalising the long-term plan amendment that because of rising interest rates in the period between when we went out for consultation and near the end, that we don't have enough budget necessarily to meet what we expect the interest costs to be this year. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation with the council table about how we're doing in that space.
Okay, interesting response. I suppose that risk appetite through the LTP process is going to have to be carefully considered, and not just sort of for the next LTP or the one-year rate setting, but also the longer-term consequences of those decisions and taking on too much risk and, blowing your budgets here in relation to some of these aspects going forward.
Member Jenny, I guess just taking your line of questioning and framing it around, do you have some recommendations or views for us around how we can ensure that elected members through that long-term plan process are focusing in on those areas of concern or those areas of focus that you've outlined? Have you got any sort of practical suggestions around?
I think requesting information and advice from officers as you go through all the steps in the process and you work out what changes to budgets and how you're going to fund them and that whole pulling together of the package. If you take that risk lens or the financial risk lens and make sure that you keep asking those questions and considering it in the context of that package that you're pulling together. I know there's it's really challenging trying to pull that together and to particularly in the context of cost increases and inflation and the impact on the community and ratepayers. So there's a real difficulty there, but I think you need to make sure that the decisions that council's making, you're understanding the long-term consequences from a financial sustainability perspective, and that you're getting appropriate advice at all those points in time, that it's eyes wide open through those decisions.
What I'd just comment there on is in terms of as you made your final decisions for the long-term plan, it was really clear the decision you made around increasing rates or decreasing rates to ensure we were covering the costs, increased costs for interest. And also we had some conversations about potential savings for interest, insurance being able to be used to help offset the increased cost of interest that we were expecting. But that number in terms of what that was definitely part of that council decision at the end, where we reduced the level of rates rather than kept it at the level we went for consultation on.
Thanks for confirming that. Are there any further comments, questions? No? Thank you, Paishan. I think you're still with us for the next one as well, which is item 6.6 on page 121, which is our Standard & Poor's report. Move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. If I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you. Paishan, I think some good news here to share.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report shows the Standard & Poor's affirmed ratings of Council's long-term borrowing being AA- and stable outlook. I'm taking the report as read and taking questions.
Any questions for Paishan? Mr. Mayor.
Paishan, we talk about the report talks about that council could increase its debt to about 142 million in 2025. We're already over that figure now, and after their comments around our budgeting performance, I'm just sort of, I suppose, concerned that when they see our debt levels, that they may have some concerns about that.
Yes, thanks for the question, Mayor Bernie. So that the report from S&P talks about the room that we could potentially have in terms of how much more we could borrow. And
I guess in terms of budgetary performance, sitting with Standard & Poor's when we went through the process that led to this. Ultimately, budgetary performance means for them that they want us to spend less. So if we're doing well in our space in terms of improving our budgetary performance, then we would be spending less on the capital program rather than meeting our capital program, because effectively that means from their perspective that we have lower debt. In terms of your question around the level of debt that we've got now, there is a challenge for us. The fact that we've spent in total $3.7 million more through the operating deficit and through the additional interest does put a challenge for us. But as we have when we also talk about the debt number, the size of it being gross borrowings being a lot higher in the 160, that's not unusual for them, and the fact that it's a good thing for us that we are borrowing in advance of when things are due, putting it on term deposit so that we're ready to pay for debt that's due in this following year. So they do take that into account, even though the gross debt looks a bit higher. That's a good thing from their perspective. But the overall debt, absolutely, we need to be really careful about how we manage it. And the operational side of it's a particularly big area for us to manage. And the capital conversations about, I know we're having them now through the Capital Project Steering Committee, and in terms of, we've budgeted for 56 million worth of capital. We've committed to 35. What can we afford? What's reasonable to do this year versus the next 3 years? Because this is our big time for investment in all of the water's infrastructure that we need to do. So it's that careful balance about when's the right time to do everything.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it wasn't that many years ago they were criticising us for not spending our capital budget, that we weren't reaching it, and here they are now telling us they want us to spend less than what we're budgeting. Where is the happy medium? We should be aiming for 90% of our capital spend, or the mixed messages that we get seem to places us in quite a difficult situation, really.
When we talk to them about the capital program and the fact that we've got a higher one, but we've committed to completing 35, for example, in this financial year we're in, they were comfortable about that approach because they know, for example, some councils might have a high capital program but don't end up completing much of it, but don't have a clear assumption about the level that's reasonable for them. Where they see for us that we've estimated a level of capital for borrowings purposes that's reasonably in line with what we can complete, then that's a better story from them from a confidence perspective.
Jacinta or Peishan, the work that we've done as a council around development contributions and the sort of reintroduction of development contributions, and then the refresh in terms of what we've just done through the long-term plan, alongside the long-term plan amendment process, in terms of updating some of those Three Waters numbers. How much to what extent does Standard & Poor's look at that development contribution sort of profile and how we're tracking against sort of forecast versus actual growth numbers, like how we're tracking? Hopefully you get.
I think they absolutely look at it in terms of they'll look at the level that we've assumed for development contributions. They might not look necessarily strictly at the consent numbers, but they will absolutely look at the budgeted numbers and how we're tracking against those for sure. Because they do have over time have a significant impact on that debt picture.
Yeah, so just picking up on that point, I guess I was trying to get to that point and I didn't articulate it very well, is that we're obviously in a cycle now where in the market some of those growth numbers may be slowing, but over the 20-year picture that we're taking with development contributions, there's some assumptions that there'll be, we kind of flatten out over the 20 years, the peaks and troughs, and so I guess I wanted to understand how do they account for that in terms of that sort of long-term picture.
Generally, they'll look at our assumptions and compare how we're tracking, and then they'll apply some level of haircut, they call it, then generally in terms of those assumptions that we make around what we'll spend and what we're going to get in, to bring that back to something that they see as more reasonable or take a bit of a risk approach to it themselves.
Did members have any further questions or comments? All right, I think we can thank you, Peishan. Oh no, we're just hanging around for the next one too. My apologies. So we'll move on to 6.7, which is the LGFA Statement of Intent 2023 to 2026. I'll move 2.1 and 2.2 that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. If I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Olsen, all in favour? Thank you. Peishan, welcome you to introduce the paper.
So this is to update the committee on the Statement of Intent prepared by the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency, LGFA. Thank you, Councillor. You've identified a typo in 3.1, so that should read it is owned by the government 20% rather than 30%. So a few things to note is that LGFA face the same problem as in their forecast interest is increasing as well due to increased borrowings from the local authorities. They also flagged the uncertainty around Waters Reform Program, where they have tried to factor them in their second and third years of the Statement of Intent where possible. So that's the same problem that's faced by lots of local authorities. That report, I'm taking that it's read and happy to take questions.
Do members have any questions on the report? Member Jenny, thank you.
Sorry, just a comment. LGFA is my favourite thing in the whole list. Because I've been in local government long enough where there wasn't an LGFA. Each council used to have to talk to lots of bankers to try and get any loans, and it was hard yakka. So I'm very supportive of LGFA and the work that they do, and most importantly how they reduce our borrowing costs in the sector. So I'm very happy to
support this SOI and the work of LGFA more generally.
Thank you very much for that. Any further comments, questions? No. Thank you, Pei-Shan. There's no decisions or recommendations we need to make there. No, that's great. So thank you very much for your participation and commentary. We will now turn to item 6.9, which is the Continuous Improvement in Audit Actions Monitoring Report. If I could move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Mayor Burney. All in favour? Thank you. So I am inviting Jacinta, I think, to speak to this item.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, it was Pei-Shan still. Sorry,
That's okay.
I'm sorry, I kicked you out early. I apologise. Apologise for my rudeness.
I'll do a quick intro while Pei-Shan's sitting
Sorry
down.
about that, Pei-Shan.
It's our general monitoring report coming forward, explaining how we're tracking in terms of progress towards the monitoring report items. But pass it over to the table if there are any specific questions.
Pei-Shan, sorry for that error in kicking you out early. But members, did we have any comments, questions regarding our monitoring report? No. Everyone's very. Oh, Councillor Tukupa. While you're finding your place, Councillor Tukupa, I did just want to mention two items. I think there was a on the rates remission item, there is a workshop this evening to address that matter, and that's also covering off the rates penalties item, I believe, as well, is it? No?
If specifically, if there's a remission on rates penalties, then yes, that can be part of that conversation.
Councillor Tukupa, did you have your question?
Yeah, page 179. The obviously the rate final pay, and there was a date of 30th of June. However, the comment is around further investigation required. I wondered, would there be a new completion date then for this?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, there will be a review date for that. At the moment, the team, our HR team, needs to go through what is required and doing the assessment needed before we can come up with the revised date that is more practicable to achieve. But this is something that we'll look to resolve pretty soon.
Councillor.
And just the last one is page 180 into 81. And it is by status complete now, and that's the ESCT rates with the comments around how it's being dealt with. I just wondered, going forward, since this was discovered through just sample testing or some random check, is the system now set up in a way you don't have to go back now and it's resolved ongoing?
Yes, that's correct. As well as the system being set up correctly, every month once we've finished the payroll, our payroll officer runs a report to review the rates. And so also as part of the ongoing process is the review check put in place to make sure that, we don't have the same problem again.
Thank you, Councillor Tukupa. Can I just follow up on the first question that Councillor Tukupa asked regarding the items on page 179, which is the final pay ordinary pay tax rate and the lump sum payment, because they're both listed there as urgent and obviously had a June target completion date. So, from your answer, we're still scoping what those pieces of work look like. In terms of the urgent categorisation, is there what is the risk or consequence of not progressing that urgently as we've it sort of was indicated in the table? Can you just give us a sort of a sense of I guess the level of risk or yeah.
So thanks for the question. So in terms of the risk, it will be that council will be asked to reassess the PAYE tax that we've been filing and returning, and with the scope, we'll understand the quantum of the risk, as in whether we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands and that sort of risk, financial risk.
Thank you for that. Did members have any further questions on the monitoring report? There being none, thank you, Peishan. I think that you're still here for the. I'm apologies. I'm all over the place today with our agenda. We're in order. Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. Grayson has reminded we have one further recommendation, 2.3. So I'll move that the Risk and Insurance Committee notes the Risk and Insurance Committee resolution and actions monitoring report. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Olsen. All in favour? Or sorry, any discussion? I don't think there will be, but all in favour. Thank you. 6.10. That is on page 185, the Risk and Insurance Committee Work Programme. I'll move 2.1 and 2.2 that the report be received and the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. If I could have a seconder. Councillor Young, I think great. All in favour? Thank you. And Jacinta, you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. So this is our work program in terms of the Risk and Insurance Committee. There's a couple of points I just wanted to note before we get into a conversation was in relation to sensitive expenditure. You will have received a presentation in this space. What we're currently in the process of reviewing the sensitive expenditure policy, so that's getting updated at the moment. What we need to do is make sure we're upskilling our teams in terms of what sensitive expenditure is, making sure everybody's brought up to the same level of expectation so that then we can roll out more due diligence in terms of checking the space. It needs a focus again, I would say, in terms of what we're doing in this space. And also for elected members is making sure there's real clarity for those new members about the expectations in this space as well. So the presentation we sent you was to give you an idea of what we're planning to roll out in terms of training and for staff. And then on an ongoing basis, you will see a report coming to this committee. Before we rolled out the report, though, we wanted to make sure that we were doing the training and expectation before we launched the reporting side of things.
And so as per the work program, we'll expect our first report around sensitive expenditure in Q1 of 2024. Great. So obviously this work program is discussed with myself as chair and the team, and we've obviously picked up on various things that members have raised around in previous council meetings, committee meetings rather. But does council?
Yeah, I just wondered that there's a vacant deep dive in that last quarter, and maybe you're already thinking about what the next topic might be after animal control. I'm a little bit interested. It depends how other members feel. Understanding our security measures in a range of ways, and that's how we deal with lockdowns if there's threats or recent events not that we're Auckland, but yeah, safety of staff, or even if we were in the middle of a meeting, someone is upset in the community or does something, we wouldn't want to, like, what's our response to that? Like, what do we have in place, and how do we test that annually? Like, we do a fire drill. I don't know. Like, I want to understand how the safety of everybody.
Thank the member for the question. I hand over to the Chief Executive in a moment. I do think that in our very first risk and assurance meeting, we may have had a slightly more detailed report on a particular security incident, and I don't think you were on the committee at that stage, so we may be able to dig that out and provide you a copy of that to see whether that covers some of the elements here. But I'll pass over to the Chief Executive just to correct me if I'm wrong on that front.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings, and through the chair. You're correct. We provided a fairly deep analysis off the back of a significant incident last year, but I think Councillor Tukapoa's suggestion is a really good one. The reason for that is that I think it's good timing now over 12 months off the back of that incident for us to review what did we say we would do and how much have we done. There is a pending report to come to Council around some of the final actions of that report, which are around the security measures in the front of our civic facility centre. But members of the committee will recall at the last meeting we did a deep dive on intimidating and threatening behaviour, and certainly since then there have been a number of incidents towards our staff, and we're continuing to encourage our staff to make sure that they're recording those incidents. And I think that I think that we're in a context where it would be important for us to have that deeper conversation around security measures for staff, wider than just intimidating and threatening behaviour, but other things going on.
So I think Councillor Tukapoa had obviously observed the vacant deep dive spot in Q2 2024, but it sounds like the conversation that you've just outlined is something that we probably need to schedule earlier. Would it be unreasonable to request something along that lines, perhaps not even in the form of a deep dive, but at least an initial conversation at our next meeting, and then we can determine whether there is an appetite for an even further deep dive or further work. Would that be welcome? Councillor Tukapoa, are you comfortable with that? Yep. Is there general support for that around the table? If I could just get a nod of the heads. Yep. Okay. Members, is there any further matters or items that anyone's expecting to see across the next, I guess, the last quarter of this year or Q1 in 2024? Is there anything that anyone's expecting to see, would like to see, would like to have a discussion around? No? Okay. Member Jen.
I've got a question just around what is in the plan. I see the annual reports coming to the committee on the 8th of November, and I'm just wondering where we've landed with the process for that. I understood that we were aiming to make sure we completed and got the annual report sorted out and signed out by the 30th of October, being the legislative requirement.
Thanks. Yes, so we're in the sort of in the last bit of completing the annual report at the moment. The intention was, and it just is good to just clarify for expectation, that because of the timing of getting a full risk and assurance committee in before we move through the audit process, it wasn't going to be possible. So our intention is that around the middle of September, as soon as the document's been fully reviewed internally, that when we provide it to the auditors, which is planning to do that a week before they arrive, on the 21st, is that we'd also provide it to this committee for comment and feedback. So absolutely the intention is still to look to have it adopted by the 30th of October, but allowing for all those review processes to happen. The understanding is that this would be reviewed by this committee, but on an informal basis rather than through a formal process.
there was also a discussion around, and it's a conversation hadn't quite yet had with the mayor, but that perhaps we were considering, when council considers the annual report, that we may request that the independent members be invited to attend and participate in those discussions, and I think that might be a way of sort of achieving what we want to achieve without necessarily having a separate risk and assurance meeting. So we can talk offline about that and how that looks. Any further comments, views? But Jenny.
Sorry, last question.
No.
I noticed that we didn't get a procurement update, and there's one scheduled for the next few meetings as well. I don't think we have had one in the last few meetings either. So I'm just wondering what the purpose of that is. Bit of context maybe around the purpose of that report and the intent.
So I'm going to hand over to Nikki Brady. I will just say that we have been receiving procurement reporting through the organisation performance report that comes to full council. But I'll pass over to Nikki and we'll just understand what's anticipated in that space in terms of this committee.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So just to clarify, we have got a crossover here between the OPR report and what we agreed to go through to OPR, the update to the task force, and also what we intend to bring to this committee. So there may not be an update at each one of those quarters, but where there is relevant information, we intend to bring that update through. But why there's not an update here was a crossover of timing to the full OPR report versus the interim. So that's why there's not one to this meeting.
Nikki, can you just remind me which task force or subcommittee, or steering committee does the reporting also come to?
It's the funding and rating task force, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we will just clarify because obviously when the commitment was to bring it too far, that was when it was the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, and so we had made that change that it would go to council. So we will just clarify internally because I think the expectation is procurement stuff is going to council, not far.
It's what I think we will do. I've just had a brief conversation with Grayson. I think just for the visibility of particularly our independents, that will ensure that information is obviously visible to you, because I think particularly the organisation performance report obviously provides the big picture and the context to a lot of the discussions that we have. So, but yeah, we can take that conversation offline and ensure that we're getting the level of information. All right. Well, with that, unless there's any further comments, what I do is we've got one in-committee item. So, sorry, thank you, Grayson. Gosh. So Grayson's reminded me that I've missed 2.3, so I'll move 2.3, that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee work program. Could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tukabua. Any discussion? No. All in favour? Thank you very much. So yes, we now stop the. Oh, sorry, we've got a couple of procedural things, don't we, Grayson? So I need to move. Where's that? It'll be the last page. Sorry, there we go. Excellent. So I'll move that we now move into public excluded on the ground. Sorry, this is under section 7.2a. That the withholding of information necessary to protect the privacy of natural persons, including that of a deceased person. Could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Mayor Burney. All in favour? Thank you. We can stop the live recording and we will might just take 2 minutes.